Hi Ange, hi anyone else who's listening. So this is chapter 2, Ange, and it's called Origins of My Inspiration. I know Ange and anyone else that knows me probably knows a lot of my story, so this is just telling you about some of my family members. When I wrote this book, they had to edit out 80,000 words because I tried to write about each and every one of my cousins, because each of them have inspired me in some way throughout my life, and I have so many of them, and it actually needed someone who didn't know me to edit it, so it made it a more readable story rather than yeah. Anyway, so as long as anyone in my family especially, I want you to know that if ever you're curious as to what I would have written about you, I can tell you straight away what it is. Each of you have inspired me, all the way down to my second cousins. Third cousins are all a little bit young, and I'm sure they're yet to inspire me. Okay, so here we go. This is chapter 2, Origins of My Inspiration. In this chapter, I want to tell you about the abuse that was suffered by my great-grandmother, Annie. The reason I do this is because there's so many forms of abuse. I just wanted to open people's minds, especially those people that have been sexually abused, that realize that, you know, other people are suffering in their own ways too. No one gets through this life without a story. And it's how we react to the story as to how we get to live our life. Okay, so I want to tell you about my great-grandmother, Annie. The dynamics of abuse are not only about the victim, but many people become victims. They are drawn into what I describe as a whirlpool of abuse. I'm lucky that I have a strong family, and you must get to know them through my story. They have helped shape me, and are the core of my inspiration. I also want to share their stories to show how abuse has been dealt with in the past. My story is also theirs. It makes me so sad that, you know, everyone gets to have a taste of it, whether it directly happens to you or to someone very close to you. Family, whatever form that takes for you. I'm talking adoptive, foster, your friends are bringing you up, whatever it is, whatever your family is, okay? You can't say you don't have family, because we all have it. It just comes in very different forms. Like, I have a work family, and I love them dearly. I have a friendship group that is also a very strong family to me too. I know that, you know, there's quite, say, 5 strong people in my life where when shit hits a fan, I can turn to. Okay, so family, whatever form that takes for you, defines us as those around you as we grow up. Within these pages, you will see how impact of abuse in generations before me has contributed to my story. My great-grandfather, John, abused my great-grandmother, Annie. And I want to share with you how Obie and Pat, my grandparents, my grandfather and Nana, handled the abuse as young adults in the mid-50s. I'm very proud of my grandparents, because a lot of the time, in an era when people didn't air their dirty laundry, abuse was largely ignored, as it is now, but more so back then. Despite the establishment of non-government and volunteer child protection agencies in the late 19th century, it was not until the 1960s that the second wave of child rescue movement brought the issue of child protection matters into political and public landscape, leading to changes of the governmental approach in the decades that followed. Even though the abuse of my great-grandmother went on for far too long, At least a family member stepped in, spoke up and acted, which led to eventually stopping the abuse. But let's not forget how many defense mechanisms, ways of ignoring the abuse, making excuses for it. Each member of the family and friends of the abused would have built up over a lifetime. Annie Shefton, that's my great-grandmother, and John Travis met, that's my great-grandfather, met at a local dance and married in 1926. Interestingly, when Annie was marrying John, some of her family warned her by saying, "Don't marry him, he's a cheat, a gambler, and a liar." I don't know why Annie married John, possibly because he was charismatic, or perhaps she didn't want to remain a spinster. Back in the 1920s, not having the education and opportunities we have now, many women relied on male to support them financially. So perhaps she thought she didn't have a choice. I'm not sure what the case was. I was just told by family members had warned her not to marry him. Within 2 years, Annie and John had their daughter, which was my Nana, Pat. Nana was to be their only child. I learned from the family that her upbringing wasn't the best. John worked as a factory hand and Annie was a school teacher. John cheated on Annie many times, I'm told. I remember Nana saying that one time she was walking down the road with her mother and she saw her father across the road with another woman. When he arrived home that evening, nothing was said. They were never allowed to discuss situations like this, because as far as Nana remembers, if anything was said, her mother would receive a flogging. John would often demean Annie emotionally. One instance was when he told her daughter Pat, my Nana, in a very aggressive manner to fix her mother's hair. This was his way of putting down her looks, humiliating her. Nana also told me how he cut up paper and made rolls and then would wrap a couple of pound notes around it. He would then strut around flaunting as if he was perceived wealthy, pulling out loads of money, which appeared to be loads of money, and he would peel off a note at a time. Keep in mind that he was a gambler who squandered his money, so this was all a farce, as he wasn't even able to give Annie enough money for food. Annie had to do all the work at home, plus she went cleaning others' houses, taking her baby with her just to earn some money. I can remember Nana telling me about how her mother stole money from her boss's petty cash tin because she had no money to buy food. She told me how hard... Hey, Buster. You're beautiful. She told me how hard this must have been, as Annie was a strong, independent woman. Nana recalled how no one knew about her stealing, and she did repay the money. Come here. Nana was in her teens during World War II and was sent to north of England to escape the fighting. Nana was sent to a household compromise of John's extended family members. Sadly, she'd escaped the abusive home life where she was loved and cared for by her mother, only to move into where she was neglected emotionally and abused daily. No respect or love was shown to her. Nana had always had a stutter, but when she arrived home, it was noticeably worse, as were her intense shyness and lack of confidence, amplified due to the bad treatment she had endured. These repercussions were due to living in a household of abuse. Nana's mother took her to the doctor, who prescribed rum and warm milk, which supposedly would help relax her and help with her stuttering. Nana was about 14 years old at the time. Once Nana was back home, and even with the medication, the stutter still didn't settle. Hey, no. Say hello. Say hello. Costa, hello. He just wants pats. Okay. Sorry, Ange. It takes so long sometimes, the way that I read. Pat grew older and enjoyed going to the local village dances almost every week. She met my grandfather, Laurie, who we called Obi as kids. And one of these dances, even though she was so shy and had her stutter, although Pat's friends liked Laurie, Laurie only had eyes for Pat. They began dating and went to dances together after that. My grandfather, Laurie, had come from a low-income family. I called him Obi, a nickname which the family came to from the license plate on his car, because at the age of 43 he felt he was too young to be a granddad. I'm told Laurie's parents and their neighbours purchased and shared shoes of the children's shoes so that all the kids could participate in soccer and other sports. Obi's father died when Obi was 11, so Obi's older brother, also named John, did the right thing by the family and supported them. In 1942, when John was in his early 20s, it came time for Obi to take over the reins in supporting the family. However, Obi ran away to the war, enticed by the governments, was saying how fun it was to go overseas. Obi was 16 but lied about his age. He signed on so he didn't have to do the job of supporting his family. I'm sure a lot of younger men thought it was going to be exciting heading off to war. Obi told me that's the way the government sold it to them on the radio advertisements. I think his plan backfired because he never actually spoke the truth about the war until he was on his deathbed, when I was lucky enough to record it. Obi used to tell us lots of stories when we were children. It wasn't until my teens I realised some of his stories were just that, stories with no truth in them. He loved to make sure life was more colourful. Returning home from the war to Yorkshire, a small district in England, Obi married Pat in 1948. They had a baby girl in January 1950, my mum, and they called her Pauline, followed by her brother Stephen, who's my uncle. During her life, Nana, Pat, had a few jobs, working as a receptionist, delivery driver, working in a bakery, and then working in the family's store. Annie, my great-grandmother, loved helping the family so much, she established a grocery store in the 1950s. At this stage, Obi was bedridden due to malaria, which he had contacted while away at war. Around this time, my grandparents moved into, my great-grandparents, Annie and John, moved in with my Nana and Obi's home. So that meant John, Annie, Nana and Obi and 2 kids were all living together. John, my great-grandfather, was still abusing Annie under their roof. Annie and Pat had told my grandfather and my grandmother not to say anything, so not to upset John, the great-grandfather. Otherwise, Annie would get another flogging for making it a hassle. What a headache and a heartache it must have been. And this is what I'm saying. Even though Annie got the flogging, so many people are hurting. And the kids would have been hurting too, like Pauline and Stephen. Obi respected these women's wishes and said nothing until one night during dinner, John reached over and grabbed some of Obi's food off his plate. Obi grabbed a fork and banged it on the table, missing John's hand by a millimetre. Now, I'm sure he would have missed on purpose because Obi was ex-army and had learnt to be very precise in his actions and words. But If he wanted to harm John, he could have. It was a warning to John to back off. Boundaries were set that night. Obi's patience was stretched at this time with good reason. Then I don't know if it was a couple of weeks or months later when John gave Annie her last bashing. Nana and Obi had had enough. They decided that when Obi and John headed off to work the next day, Nana would take the kids to school, then come back, pick up her mum and take her to the priest and tell what John was doing to Annie. The priest threw it back in my Nana's face, saying, "How dare you speak about your father like that? You should be ashamed of yourself." Pat told her mother to take her shirt off to show him the bruises. Her mum said, "Pat, don't be silly. I'm not doing that." And Pat started undressing her mother in front of the priest to show him. The priest and Annie were both very uncomfortable with it, but Pat was persistent. The priest, however, was shocked and said he was going to talk to John about it. They went home and Pat asked Annie to go upstairs, so she wasn't in the room when John came home. By this time, Pat's son, Stephen, was home, and Pat and Stephen had to stay upstairs with Annie. Pat had Stephen stay upstairs with Annie and said, "Neither of you come downstairs until I come and get you. I mean it. Do not come downstairs until I say." Then Pat went downstairs and John came home from work. She cooked him dinner, and during dinner she said to him, "After you finish this, you're leaving. You're not welcome in my home anymore." John angrily yelled in her face, and Nana stood up to him and said, "I'm not a Sheffield. I've got Travis blood in me. You're fighting with one of your own now." Oh my God. John stormed upstairs to pack, but he didn't know where anything was. He was useless at it. So Nana had to pack it up for him. She packed him off, and no one gave a damn about where he went. Nana and Granddad looked after Annie, who had become sick at the stage. She was unable to look after herself. Sometimes she dirtied herself, and at times, when Nana was out, Obi would clean her up and set her back up. Obi never said anything about this to anyone. It was Annie who told Nana. She was so embarrassed yet grateful that her son-in-law would do such a thing for her. Whew. Pretty big stuff, eh? Very, very special. All of them were strong people to stand up to such a violent man, especially in those days. After Annie died, Pat and Obi made a brave decision. They left England and travelled to Australia to set up a new home. My grandparents had a positive influence on me on me as a child. Their stories resonate with me. Their influence, I'm sure, has helped me step up, speak out, and choose the path of my life. Now that I know who I am, as I write this book, I recognise how very, very brave they were. While growing up, my Nana, who lived nearby, taught me etiquette, and at times she took me and my younger brother Michael to expensive fancy restaurants. She was always a part of our family holidays, taking us to what I thought were magical places such as Bribie Island and Redcliffe. Magical because we would splash in the water, pump for yabbies and run free. She supported my parents financially at times. Nana was very generous and kind that way. Nana would help me redecorate my room and keep it trendy. She taught me how to exercise and taught me how never to give secrets away. Michael and I used to steal chocolates out of the fridge all the time, and then we would hide the wrappers everywhere, and she would never say anything. It wasn't until we were older that we realized she would have found at least 10 wrappers every time we visited, and we visited regularly. She never said anything about it. She just refilled the fridge full of chocolates for us to steal next time. That was cute considering she was a tough Nana. Another time, hidden behind a curtain, my Nana found "fuck off" written in big red letters on the wall. She pulled my brother and myself aside to find out who was guilty. I can't remember who took the blame, but Nana hid it and putting fresh wallpaper over it, while teaching us how to hang out at the same time. While teaching us to hang it at the same time. The wallpaper I'm talking about. And never told a soul. Never. Nana had our back. She sorted it out without making it a big, dirty story. Nana would brush my hair, stroking it softly. Often we would sit on the veranda, just sit and talk, and sometimes we'd say nothing in comfortable silence, watching the traffic whizzing by, past. Nana did not like drama. She taught us how to polish silverware, plant a garden, set a formal table, and how to paint. She spent a lot of time with us. My parents taught us discipline and manners, and they were very busy, as most parents are. So grandparents, particularly Nana, offered me a different support based on her vision of living. Grandparents fill the gaps in families, and Nana did in ours. She taught me skills to support of my niece and nephew and their parents without wanting anything in return. Nana was incredible. Okay. That's what I'd like to do for my niece and nephew and my stepkids too. I want to share and teach them and help them experience happy life without wanting anything in return. I will respect their decisions and be there to support them. My grandfather, Obi, was a polar opposite to Nana. He taught us outdoorsy things like golf and fishing. He was very much preoccupied with his own hobbies and was always learning and evolving. I remember he loved cooking, was a soccer fan, and he worked and taught apprentices in metal trades. Also, after doing a first aid course, he became the St. John's first aid officer from the company he worked in. He was always learning something new, even doing massage course and becoming a mobile masseur, supporting Queensland representative women's softball team whenever his work commitments allowed him to travel with them. There was always something. But when he was home, he'd sit in front of the television. We didn't have any real quality one-on-one time with him, which was typical of relationships in those days. He would bitch in Nana's ear about what was upsetting him, usually a mundane thing such as children making noise when he was watching TV rather than dealing with it himself. Nana was disciplined and she just tried to fix the problem the best way she could to please Obi, even though at times the rest of the family thought she was the nag. We thought Obi was a sweet guy sitting in the corner, but it wasn't until I looked back and thought about things Nana said to me as an adult, and I realized Nana had just been trying to keep the peace and do what was needed to do to keep Obi content. Before Nana passed away in 2016, she was in a nursing home. I'd go visit on Sundays and sit reading my paper on the floor. I looked up at her and she'd just be looking at me and reminding me of those days on the veranda that were so special. I could go on about Nana because she was a major influence of strength, style, and ability, and set standards. Thanks to her, if I was going to do something, I'd do it to the best of my ability. I am grateful and I am thankful for her being in my life. In hindsight, how I wish I'd shared my secret, my story with Nana before she died. She was my backbone and would have listened and given me strength. She also would have stepped up and confronted my abuser. Actually, I think she would have fucking killed him. That's it today. That might have gone on and on a little bit, but I think it's really important that when we fall down, that we remember all the good things in our life. because we need to embrace them to stand back up, whether it be the past or the present, or what you see in the future for yourself. Okay, guys, see you later.